My name is Max and I'm 27 years old. Every year, Thanksgiving was supposed to be the one time I could count on a warm, familiar family dinner. A time to put aside all the mess of life and just be with the people who were supposed to care about me the most. But this year, everything went horribly wrong. I showed up at my parents' house just before dinner, a bottle of wine in hand, ready to celebrate like we always did. Or at least, I tried to act like everything was fine, even though it hadn't been in a while. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. His eyes barely glanced up when I walked in. He didn't even greet me. "Hey Dad," I said, my voice a little louder than I intended. "How's it going?" Was all he grunted back, eyes still on the screen. I shrugged it off and went to the kitchen to help Mom, who was still stirring something on the stove. She barely acknowledged me either, just offering a quick smile. "Dinner's almost ready, Max. Just set the table." I set the table, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up on me, the feeling that this year things were different. It had been like this for months, a cold distance growing between us. My dad, always hard to read, had seemed even more distant lately, and Mom? Well, she was just there. Dinner began, and as usual, we sat down at the same old table. Mom at one end, Dad at the other, Emily, my younger sister, sitting next to Dad. I took my usual seat beside Emily, my stomach already in knots. The conversation started off small as always, about work, the weather, how Emily's new job was going. They were proud of her, of course. She had everything together. The golden child. Then came my turn. "So, Max, how's work?" Dad asked casually, his eyes flicking over to me for the first time that evening. "Good," I answered, trying to sound positive. "Busy. But, just trying to get things sorted." "That's good," Dad replied, his voice flat. "You still living at home?" I felt my face flush. "Yeah. It's just easier for now." He didn't say anything for a moment. I could feel Emily's gaze on me. She had already started on her third helping of mashed potatoes, oblivious to the tension building in the air. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. "Max," Dad said slowly, his voice colder now, "you're 27 years old and you're still living at home. What are you doing with your life?" The room seemed to freeze for a second. Mom's spoon clinked against the plate, but no one said anything. I could feel the heat of their disapproval rising, suffocating me. "I'm working on it, Dad," I said, my voice tightening. "I'm just not rushing things. I'm still figuring stuff out." "You've been figuring it out for years," Dad snapped. "You're wasting your time, Max. You're wasting your potential. It's pathetic." His words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to defend myself, to tell him everything I'd been trying to do. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at my plate. The silence felt heavy, pressing against me. "And what's your plan, Max?" Dad continued, his tone cutting now. "You think you can keep living off us forever? You're not a kid anymore. You're a grown man who can't even take care of himself." I opened my mouth to respond, but my voice wouldn't come out. What could I say? He was right in a way. But the way he said it, the way he made me feel like I was the biggest disappointment, it was too much. "You're a loser," Dad said, his words colder than ice. "I don't know what to tell you, but it's time you started acting like an adult." I felt my stomach drop. The last word stung like nothing I'd ever felt. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I just sat there, frozen. Mom didn't say anything. Emily didn't say anything. No one did. "Maybe it's time you left," Dad added, his voice flat again. "We've had enough of this. You need to figure it out on your own. You're not welcome here anymore." I stared at him, unable to process what was happening. "What?" I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Go," he said, his tone final. "You've overstayed your welcome." I don't even remember getting up from the table. One minute I was sitting there, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall, and the next I was standing by the door. My mind couldn't catch up with what had just happened. My father had kicked me out. My own family had just pushed me aside like I was nothing. I could hear the sound of Emily's fork clinking against her plate in the background, but no one said a word. I looked at Mom, hoping for some sign, any sign that she would intervene. But she didn't. She just sat there, silent and distant. "Max," Dad said, his voice now low but laced with anger, "I'm not going to keep pretending that this is okay. You need to leave. You're an adult. You've made your choices. Now deal with the consequences." I stood frozen by the door, unable to move. My chest tightened, my throat closing up. What had I done to deserve this? "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "This is my family. This is Thanksgiving. You can't." "I can," Dad interrupted, his voice cold as stone. "And I am. If you can't respect yourself enough to do something with your life, Don't expect me to keep bailing you out. His words hit harder than anything physical could. I felt smaller, more insignificant with every syllable. I turned around slowly, the anger boiling up inside me, but I didn't let it escape. There was no point. I was already done. My father had made it clear. I wasn't welcome. I grabbed my jacket from the hallway and walked out of the house, my heart racing. I could hear my mom's soft voice in the background, but I didn't turn around. I knew she wouldn't stop him. She never did. She just stayed silent, always going along with whatever he said. As I stepped into the cold air, I couldn't help but feel a surge of emotion. Hurt, anger, confusion. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something stronger. A sense of relief. Maybe this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I realized that I didn't need to keep fighting for their approval. I didn't need to keep being the one to fix everything. This time I was done trying to please them. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had nothing holding me back. I had been stuck in that house, trying to meet their impossible standards, trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. But now I was free. Free from their expectations, free from the constant judgment, and free to figure out who I really was. But that didn't make the pain go away. I had been rejected by the very people I thought would always be there for me. Thanksgiving, the holiday meant for family, had turned into my moment of rejection. I walked down the street, the cool night air biting at my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't want to answer it. I already knew who it was, Dad. He was probably texting to tell me I was an idiot, that I had blown it. But I didn't need to hear that right now. I kept walking. The night felt endless. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to keep moving. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows as I walked, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. Every few steps I pulled out my phone, checking for any messages, hoping for something, anything, from my parents. But there was nothing. It wasn't just the rejection that hurt. It was the fact that, for the first time, I realized how little my family truly cared about me. All these years, I had been trying so hard to fit into their mold, trying to be what they expected me to be. And for what? So I could continue living in their shadow? So I could keep pretending everything was fine when they never really saw me? I reached a park and sat down on a bench, staring at the empty swings swaying gently in the breeze. It was quiet now, the usual sound of children playing replaced by the stillness of the evening. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and closed my eyes, trying to block out the cold, the pain, everything. But the thoughts kept creeping in. Why did they do this? Why now? It didn't make sense. It was a few hours later when I finally texted Michelle, my sister. I wasn't sure why, but something inside me wanted to hear her side of things. Maybe she would understand. I need to talk. Please tell me this isn't all my fault. A few minutes passed and my phone buzzed. She had responded. Max, I don't know what to say. He's been frustrated with you for a while. But I don't think you're a loser. Please don't think that. I'm sorry. I stared at her message, feeling a strange mixture of relief and frustration. She apologized, but she didn't stand up to Dad. She never did. She never took my side. It was always about keeping the peace, about not rocking the boat. And in the end, she was just as complicit as the rest of them. I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. For so long, I had tried to make things work with my family. I had tried to meet their expectations. I had tried to be the perfect son. But in the end, it didn't matter. No matter how much I tried, I was never going to fit into their narrow view of who I should be. And that realization, that the problem wasn't me, it was them, was the hardest part. But it was also the turning point. I wasn't going to keep chasing after something that would never come. I wasn't going to keep trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. It was time to walk away, to find my own path, my own way. The night felt like it was swallowing me whole, but in that darkness I finally felt the first spark of clarity. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was time for me to build my own life, to make my own decisions, to finally stop trying to earn approval from the people who had never really seen me. As the city around me grew quieter, I stood up from the bench, took a deep breath, and started walking again. This time I had a direction. I didn't have a clear destination in mind, but I knew I couldn't go back to that house. I couldn't face them again, not after everything that had happened. I needed space. I needed time to figure out what came next, without their voices in my head telling me what I was supposed to do. By the time I reached a small cafe a few blocks away, the cold had crept deep into my bones and my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Dad. You need to stop being so sensitive. This is what's best for you. You can't keep living in a fantasy world. I stared at the screen, feeling an odd mixture of anger and emptiness. You still didn't get it? You still didn't see me? The words, "You're a loser, you've overstayed your welcome," echoed in my head. The emotional weight of it all was suffocating, but in a strange way, it also gave me clarity. I stepped into the cafe and ordered a coffee, sitting by the window. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my body, but the ache in my chest remained. The world outside was quiet now, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. I felt like an outsider in my own life. But sitting there watching the world go by, something shifted. I realized that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to live up to their impossible standards. I had been trying for years to fit into their vision of success, but it wasn't mine. It was theirs. And I didn't need it. For the first time in a long while, I let myself think about what I truly wanted. What was it that made me happy? What did I want to do with my life? It wasn't about fixing things with them. It wasn't about trying to get them to understand. It was about finding my own way. I wasn't going to beg them for acceptance. I wasn't going to keep clinging to a family that refused to see me for who I was. I was going to build my own future, one that didn't depend on their approval. And as I sat there, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I finally let go. It wasn't just about leaving my family's house. It was about leaving behind the need to please them, the need to earn their love. I finished my coffee and walked back out into the cold night air. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was finally taking control of my own life. The days that followed were a blur. I stayed in a small motel for the night, using the time to think and reflect. For the first time in a long time I was completely alone. No distractions, no expectations, just the sound of my own thoughts. It felt strange. I had never been away from my family for this long, but the more I stayed away, the more I realized I had needed this distance. I thought about everything that had led up to that night, the years of trying to meet my parents' impossible expectations, the constant feeling of being less than, the quiet judgments that had piled up over time. But mostly I thought about the words my father had said to me. "You're a loser. You're wasting your potential." Each time I replayed those words in my head, I felt like a part of me was dying. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their approval, trying to be good enough, trying to fix everything. But it had never been enough. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the messages from my family. There were a few more from Dad, each one colder than the last. "I'm still waiting for you to grow up. When will you learn? You've got to stop blaming everyone else." Each message hit like a dagger, but the more I read, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to get what I wanted from them. They were never going to see me as anything other than their disappointment, their problem to fix. And I had spent so long trying to change that, trying to prove them wrong, but the reality was simple. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need them to tell me who I was. I already knew. I thought about my next steps. I could keep running, keep hiding from the problem, or I could face it head on. I had already walked out of their house, and now it was time to walk away from their expectations. I didn't need to keep living in their world, trying to fit into a mold that was never mine. That night I made the decision. I was done trying to be what they wanted. I was done living my life in a way that made everyone else comfortable, at the expense of my own happiness. I left the motel the next morning, determined to start fresh. I had no clear plan, no clear path ahead, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to the way things were. The first few days of being away felt strange. I moved from motel to motel, just trying to clear my head, but the weight of everything I had been through still lingered. The anger, the hurt, it was all there, simmering beneath the surface. But something else was there too, an unexpected sense of freedom. For so long, I had been defined by what my family thought of me. My success, my failures, my worth, everything had been dictated by them. But now, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to explain myself. I could finally breathe without their expectations weighing me down. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of the city. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with peeling paint and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. I hadn't had a place of my own in years, not since I was younger. The thought of living on my own was both terrifying and exhilarating. But I was determined to make it work. No more relying on them. No more waiting for them to fix everything for me. As the weeks went by, I began to adjust to the quiet. I filled my days with work, trying to put some distance between myself and the chaos I had left behind. I focused on building my own life, one step at a time. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt the weight of loneliness creep in, and there were moments when the pain of being cut off from my family still hurt. But I refused to go back. I refused to crawl back to a family that didn't value me. I started taking small steps toward my own happiness. I enrolled in a few classes at a local community college, just to see if it sparked something inside me. I worked on my career, started taking better care of myself, and even began making new friends. But the hardest part, the part that I didn't expect, was coming to terms with the fact that my family wasn't going to change. They hadn't seen me for who I truly was for years, and they probably never would. And as painful as that was, it was also liberating. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to tell me I was good enough. I learned that the hardest part of this journey wasn't walking away from them. It was walking away from the idea that my worth had ever been tied to their opinions. For so long I had tried to fit into their mold, to make them proud, to prove I was more than what they thought of me. But now I knew the truth. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval to be enough. I was enough on my own. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I found myself adjusting to the life I had built on my own. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the weight of everything still pressed down on me, but I kept moving forward. I started to find joy in the small victories, the satisfaction of paying my rent on time, the sense of accomplishment when I did well at work, the peace of having my own space, my own rules. But as time went on, something unexpected happened. I started to feel different. Not just physically or mentally, but emotionally. I had let go of the need for validation from my family, and for the first time, I was learning to value myself for who I was, not for who I thought they wanted me to be. It wasn't until one evening, about 6 months after the Thanksgiving that had changed everything, that I had a real moment of clarity. I was sitting in a cafe enjoying a quiet cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. "Max." It was my dad's voice. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in." I froze. I hadn't expected this. He hadn't reached out in months, not since the night he'd told me to leave. He'd barely acknowledged me after that, and honestly, I had assumed that I was out of his life for good. But here he was, calling, acting like everything was fine. "Yeah, it's me," I said cautiously. "What's up?" There was a long pause, as if he wasn't sure how to continue. "I've been thinking, Max," he finally said. "About everything. About you. About how we treated you." I braced myself for the apology I knew was coming, but it didn't come the way I expected. It wasn't a heartfelt, tearful admission of guilt. It wasn't an "I'm sorry for everything" kind of apology. It was different. "I don't know what's been going on with me, Max," Dad continued. "I've been so focused on what you weren't doing that I couldn't see what you were doing. You've been trying. You've always been trying. I was too proud to see it. I wasn't sure how to respond." It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was more than I had ever expected. My dad, the man who had told me I was a loser and shoved me out of the door, was finally acknowledging my worth. "I don't know where this goes, Max," he said, his voice more tired than before, "but I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've done something I never thought you could do. You built yourself up. I don't know how you did it, but I see it now. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." His words hit me like a wave, but I didn't let myself be swept away. The truth was, I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need him to validate me. But hearing him finally say that he was proud of me, even in his own way, felt like a weight lifting from my chest. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said, my voice calm. "But it's not about you anymore. I've spent my life trying to earn your respect. Now I'm just living for me." We talked a little longer, but the conversation didn't go anywhere. It wasn't the closure I had always dreamed of, but it was enough. Enough for me to realize that I had moved on. I had grown past the person who needed to be accepted by my family, by my father. I was someone else now, a stronger, more self-assured version of myself. And that was enough. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel like something I had built for myself, not something I was waiting to be handed to me. My apartment was still small, but it was mine. I had a steady job, I was making progress in my career, and I was learning more about myself every day. I didn't need anyone else to tell me that I was worthy. The moment I had stopped seeking validation from my parents, everything changed. I didn't need their approval to know that I was enough. One Saturday afternoon, I took a walk through the city, just taking in the sights and sounds. It had been a while since I allowed myself to simply exist without the pressure of someone else's expectations. The weight of family obligations, the pressure to be perfect in their eyes, had all but disappeared. And for the first time I felt truly free. But even with all the progress I'd made, there were still days when I missed my family. I missed the moments when it was all supposed to be easy, when we were supposed to be there for each other. I missed the holidays where we would sit together, sharing meals and memories. But now, I saw that those moments were never as perfect as I had believed them to be. They were only perfect because I had convinced myself they were. The truth was, I had been trying to make them fit into a mold that was never meant to hold me. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter to my parents. It wasn't an angry letter or a bitter one. It was just honest. I told them everything I had been feeling, everything I had learned over the past few months. I told them how their words had hurt me, how their rejection had changed the course of my life. But I also told them that I had found my own way, that I was no longer waiting for their approval to be who I was. I was finally starting to live for myself. I didn't know if I'd ever hear back from them, and honestly, it didn't matter. The letter wasn't for them, it was for me. It was my way of closing that chapter of my life and moving on. The next day, I received a message from Michelle. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her in months and I wasn't sure what to expect. We met at a cafe, and as soon as I saw her, I could feel the tension from the past months melt away. She smiled at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and sincerity. "Max," she said, her voice soft, "I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know how to handle what happened. I've always just followed Dad's lead, but I should have stood up for you. I should have been there." I nodded, surprised by her honesty. "I know you did what you could, Michelle. But I needed more than that. I needed to know that I wasn't invisible to you." "I see you now," she said quietly, looking me in the eye. "I see you, Max." And in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. My family wasn't perfect, but that didn't mean I couldn't move forward. The approval I had been craving from them was no longer something I needed to survive. I had found my own way, and I was finally at peace with who I was.